Welcome into the Autzen Audibles Podcast. Matt Prehm, Erik Skopil, Jared Mack on the show today. Your Monday mailbag. We are already at week 3. Season flies by, and it's another big game. BYU's coming to town undefeated. They just knocked off top 10 team Baylor at home. I think there's going to be a lot of discussion leading into this one of just this feels important, and I think that the questions justify it as well.
Yeah, no, I think it's we're going to get some BYU talk at the end here, and I think that's the right choice because this is a really big matchup. This is a ranked non-conference game at Autzen Stadium. Both teams ranked. I think it's interesting that the line moved quite a bit. Oregon opened, I think, at minus 6.5, and it's now down to minus 3.5 in some places. So obviously a lot of BYU money coming in, a lot of confidence in that team, and it makes sense with the way they've opened their season, knocking off number 9 Baylor on Saturday night in a real classic of a game. I mean, those that didn't get a chance to watch, go watch, at least check out the highlights or an extended highlight package. That was a real grudge match. That's kind of rare to see sometimes early on in the season where games can be pretty lopsided one way or the other. As Oregon fans knew that. I mean, that game went down to the wire, needed 2 overtimes to determine it, and BYU ended up winning. So don't expect this to be a walkover game. I don't think most fans do, but I mean, this team is now ranked 12th nationally. So if Oregon wins, there's an opportunity to move up quite a bit. And if Washington State beats Colorado State, they're kind of hovering in that other teams receiving votes range, where I could see maybe that being another ranked meeting in week 4 up in Pullman, where we'll be in about 13 days time, 12 days time. So the schedule not getting easier. This is going to be a challenging schedule, and it really doesn't open up until you get past Washington State into the month of October. So first question from @JoeyBonin33. Who is a player that has surpassed your expectations, and who is a player that you hope to see be more productive? #Autzen Audibles. Diplomatic way of asking the second part rather than saying somebody we've been disappointed in, somebody who we hope to see more production. I like that, Joey, because that's probably the way I would try to frame it as well. I'm going to give one offense and defense for both, basically, is what I'm going to do here. I want to acknowledge, it's small sample size, but I think Sean Dollars has been really impressive, and I kind of had him pegged as their number 4 running back. I kind of thought it was Cardwell and the 2 transfers was the way it would go, and it's really been kind of eye-opening how productive he's been. I think he has the most yards from scrimmage of all of them. I know he's the only one not with a touchdown, but I've just been impressed by the way he's been able to be effective in every facet of the game. You know, as a pass catcher, he has had the longest, I think, play from scrimmage for the whole season. Is that right? 39 yards, that screen pass he had? I don't think anything else has been more explosive. I just think he's been really productive. He had a great block on that spraying the first Terrence Ferguson touchdown. So I think he's proven himself more valuable, and certainly as this running back rotation, which we'll get to in a moment, kind of continues to evolve and they figure things out, I expect he'll be a central figure all season. And I didn't know if I would feel that way. I thought there was a possibility that he might be kind of the odd man left out by the time we get to week 6 or 7, and I don't expect that to be the case. Defensively, I think Casey Rogers has had, at least his last game was really impressive. I know the first game it's hard to measure. I don't know if he recorded much of any stats that game, but was around the ball everywhere. On rewatch, Jared, I don't know how they didn't record that as a sack. I mean,
it was a sack.
The quarterback was in a passing down and was rolling out, and then tried to get upfield, and Rogers tackled him 3 yards
behind the line of scrimmage.
Yeah, 3 yards shy of the line of scrimmage. That's a sack by all definitions. I was confused on rewatch of that's a. So go back and correct that. Nate Kruger, get a game stats guy on that.
Give Gracie Rogers his credit.
He should get his credit. So there's the guys that I think have surpassed expectations, and then a player or two that have kind of I would like to see be more productive. I think offensively, Chris Hudson is a guy that comes right to mind just because I know he was Matt's pick for the team's receiving leader this year. And while I didn't pick him, he was like my number 2 or number 3 choice. And he just hasn't really had much of anything from a play from scrimmage perspective. He had a nice punt return on Saturday. I just haven't seen a whole lot from him. They've tried to get him the ball in space, and those plays have been kind of eaten up. So I think there's a lot more there. And I guess kind of another half of that would be Seven McGee, kind of in the same mold. I think those slot guys I just expected to see a little bit more of, and I think we will as the season wears on. And then defensively, Noah Sewell probably is a player I want to see more production from. Not because I think he's played terrible this last game, because frankly, he didn't play that many snaps. Eastern Washington didn't really do much of anything running the football towards him. But I think he has like 5 tackles in 2 games, which is not where I expected he would be statistically, even though maybe those expectations were too high for kind of the competition and how the opposing teams were attacking Oregon defensively. So there's a couple guys I think have surpassed expectations, and a couple that I'd like to see be more productive going forward.
I like your.
Go ahead, Matt.
Go ahead, Jared. Go ahead.
No, you're good.
I liked the dollars pick. That's who I was going to pick for the offensive side of the football here. I felt like that was the player least expected. I mean, I picked all the running backs but Dollar in the Jared stock report. And he's leading the team in all-purpose yards. So offensively, that would be one for me. I know it's kind of because they've been thrown on a little bit against Georgia, but I just like the production you're getting from Jamal Hill and Bennett Williams combined. I think that duo has done a really good job together. Bennett's gotten really good in coverage, I think, has improved there. Offensively, from guys that I would maybe shocked we're not seeing. Obviously, it's Chris Hudson for me, and like Erik said, Seven McGee too. He's not really been existent. I mean, I bought a lot of stock in him as well going into the season. I think Dollars has kind of taken some of the usage that we were thinking Seven would get, but they did some end around type stuff for both Hudson and for Dollars in that Eastern Washington game. Got creative there. But those are 2 guys. Chase Cota too. I understand he's got 5 catches for 41 yards, but that felt like what a game perspective would look like for him. He looked like I don't think he's been playing bad. It's just he just hasn't gotten the ball like I thought maybe he would based off the spring game. And then defensively, DJ Johnson is one of them for me. Only 1 tackle for loss, only 1 sack through 2 games. 4 total tackles from DJ Johnson. And Georgia went kind of at him a little bit on the perimeter. I'd also maybe wonder at corner, Triquez, Bridges, and Dante Manning. I know Bridges had the interception. They played better against Eastern Washington. I think inferior talent helped there, but they really struggled against Georgia. And they played Jalil Florence quite a bit in that second half against Georgia in place of Bridges and Manning, which is kind of interesting. So I would say those 2 guys would be some other guys on the defensive side of the football for me.
I think this is a tough question to answer because like 40 guys didn't play well against Georgia, and now we're just going off of 1 game. So I like the Sean Dollars pick. I think we all didn't necessarily have him in like the top 3 of the running back contention. Certainly not probably having this much of an impact. Again, the running back rotation, we'll see. We'll answer that question later in the show, but we'll see where he ends up because as much as I think that they might do like a 4 or 5 man guy rotation for the season, I don't know. I think at one point they might just have to dwindle it down to 3 dudes. So we'll see who might be the odd man out there. But I do like what he's done this season. He's been kind of a spark plug off the bench on those 3rd down situations. Offensively, for me, I'm going with Troy Franklin. He had a little bit of buzz about being the most consistent guy coming into the season. Excuse me. Obviously, he has the 10 catches on Saturday against Eastern Washington. That's clearly a highlight, but he still was pretty good against Georgia. He had 2 of the longer receptions of the day, specifically on the end of the first half final drive for Oregon. I think he's been better than I had anticipated for sure. I thought that Dante Thornton and Troy Franklin were kind of equals, and that I would actually give the edge to Thornton because of his size and length and speed. But Troy Franklin's been able to find his way to adapt to defenses, find the soft spot in zones, sit there, get catches, and develop some sort of chemistry and relationship with Bo Nix. So I really like what I'm seeing from him so far on the offensive side of the ball. Also, Marcus Harper, 100%, just totally exceeded expectations on that offensive line. I don't think any of us had expectations for him going into the season, mostly because Ryan Walk was the presumed starter. So big ups to Marcus Harper for being really doing very well in his first career start, and then his first meaningful snaps in a game against Georgia in his first week. Defensively, Casey Rogers, that was my guy, Eric. That was a good pick. I think he's been better than anticipated. He's been disruptive. He should have had a sack. Because he plays an interior defensive line position, his stats aren't going to be as good as an edge guy, but I think he's going to be very productive this season and cause a lot of mayhem in the backfield for opposing offenses. Disappointments or player I hope to see to be more productive. I'll double up on Matt with Dante Manning and Tre'Quez Bridges. I was all aboard the Dante Manning train heading into the season. Like Matt said, Bridges had the interception against Eastern Washington. They were both fine, but Bridges was not great against Georgia. A lot of blown coverages there. I think the secondary as a whole has been kind of up and down. They haven't had a lot of actual, or not actual, but like a normal kind of a passing attack go against them yet. So I'm interested to see what that'll happen. I think it might against BYU, but then offensively, I don't know. I mean, I think people are doing fine. Maybe you could put Bo Nix, but he was really good against Eastern Washington.
Mm-hmm.
It's just hard for me to judge because that Georgia game, nobody played well.
I think another name defensively that we haven't mentioned for players to be more productive is Brandon Dorlus. Not that he's been.
I thought about him.
Not that he's been bad, but I think he has 3 tackles, 1 tackle for loss. Tackle for loss last game was really impressive, but that's a guy who has been kind of he's the alpha of the defense. That's what we've heard coming in, and he's been a little quiet. He and Noah Sewell, who have been kind of, those are the 2 returning first team all conference guys. Neither have had kind of the production you'd expect, and maybe we'll get to this at the back end when we talk BYU. I think there should be more opportunity for that based upon at least how BYU game planned and played against Baylor. So I think those are names I think I'm kind of cautiously optimistic we'll have a little bit more production even as soon as this upcoming week. All right, second one from @StephenCole541. What do you think of the 4-man running back rotation? Do you think it'll continue all season, or is it more of a trial period to see who is best suited for the position? I'd love to hear your take. #Autzen Audibles. Jared kind of alluded a little bit to his perspective on it, and I probably share a little bit of it. I probably am closer to where Jared's at than it's staying at 4. I think we'll see it get closer to 3 as the season goes down. I also am not totally sure it's going to go. Here's what I'd say. Right now, it's like I don't have snap counts. I'd like to see snap counts per game. I think they might put those in the game notes. So that might be something to look at later for a content item, by the way. But the touches so far, like if you're going to go through it through 2 games, the touches for the 4 running backs in contention, Dollars has 13 carries, Irving has 13 carries, Cardwell has 11 carries, and Noah Whittington has 11 carries. And you go at receptions here, Dollars has 4 receptions, Cardwell has 4 receptions, Irving has 2 receptions, but he did drop 2, and Whittington has 2 receptions. So like across the board, it's basically split. You're looking at like 18 to 13 touches for every one of those 4 guys. I would be surprised if that kind of split continues. I do think they might use all 4 for the entire season, but my guess is it gets closer to 3 players in kind of a closer to us even split, and then a 4th guy who's maybe used more situationally. I'm not even going to try to wager a guess of who gets dropped or what the hierarchy looks like of who's starting. They played 2 games, 2 different guys have started. I bet you it could be a 3rd guy start against BYU. I wouldn't count that out at all. So and to the initial part, what do I think of it? I don't mind it at all. I know it's been kind of a hot topic on our message board. People don't like that they're not just using 2 guys or, prioritizing one player as the kind of lead back. I'm not bothered by that. This is becoming pretty common in college football if you have the numbers, and it's becoming even kind of common in the NFL. Like you look at a couple of teams here that have started the season basically with 2 starting running backs, and those players play equal snaps, play a lot together, even on the field. And I think we're going to see a little bit more of that, maybe a little bit more 2 running back sets if they feel comfortable with it. But I'm not that bothered by a 4-man running back rotation. And then to the second question, I think long term, eventually this will probably become closer to like a 3-player rotation based upon Dillingham's history. And I think at some point you'll see the touches stop being so even, because right now, again, it's like the rushes are basically even, the receptions and targets are basically even, like the opportunities to get the football have basically been even for 4 players through 2 games. And I don't know if that's going to be something I expect when we get into like at least into October. I could see it being similar against BYU next week, maybe. But I could also see it being a really competitive game, and they just decide, hey, Byron is having an awesome game, or Bucky's having an awesome game. Let's ride with the hot hand in the fourth quarter to try to put this one away.
This is going to be a hot hand show, 100%. I touched on it just a bit. I think I touched on it on the post-game podcast as well. Not that I agree with the message board that this is an issue. I just like my running backs in like a little old school more manner where it's really 2 guys and you have a third that jumps in every once in a while to give rest or is specifically a third down back. This is almost like a 6-man running back room just because they threw Seven McGee in the backfield against Eastern Washington. Again, former running back, he can certainly do it if someone goes down. That was the thought process that we had before Irving and Whittington and Jordan James either committed or transferred to Oregon, the idea that they could move Seven McGee back to running back. But I don't look at it as a bad thing. I think it's great that they have 4 guys who have all shown that they can be productive. It's one thing if you have 4 or 5 guys and they go out there and that they're frankly not that good. But every single one of these running backs has shown that in spurts, they can get you 10 to 12 yards on a carry. They can catch the ball out of the backfield. They can pass block every once in a while. I think pass blocking actually might be what it comes down to in the long run of just who can provide the best protection and who's the best option out of the backfield and catching passes. So I think that's something to monitor. But personally, again, I would be surprised if it sticks at a 4 to 5 man running back rotation for most of the season. Like Erik said, I could see it going against BYU. You might have to pull some stunts because BYU is a very good team. You want as many tricks in the basket as you possibly can. But going against Washington State, then going into conference, like deep conference play in October, November, I really think that they'll be whittling it down to 3 guys. And again, like Erik said, I'm not going to take a guess on who those 3 guys are because every single one of these guys, like Erik mentioned, has very similar reps. They have very similar numbers too. Again, there's Sean Dollars has the longest reception of the season, but Marquise Irving averaged over 8 yards a carry last game. So there's some talent there. There's some real talent in that running back room, and I'm not going to guess who the 3 guys are that take most of the talent away.
I think we're going to see this as long as it's successful until otherwise proven it's not. I don't know. There's no rule that you have to go to 2 or 1 or 3 or 5. It doesn't really matter. You play what you work, what you want to play. And as long as it keeps working, they will continue to do that. And so far through 2 games, I think it's working. I think there's one thing personally, definitively that we can state that Dollars, if they do pare it down, Dollars will be in that group. And I think we can say definitively that Dollars is the team's third down back. He's in there almost exclusively on third down to start games. He is tied for the team in attempts with 13 carries. He has the most rushing yards on the team. He has the highest average per carry on the team at 7, which is 0.1 away from what Cardwell is at 6.9 and 0.3 away at Marquise Irving.
Right.
So it's you're literally splitting hairs here, but you also look at the receiving end, and he's got the longest catch of the season at 39 yards off a screenplay, which I think came on a third down. I want to say he's got the most catches of running backs. Oh, Cardwell has.
They both have 4.
4 as well. But he's up there. So I think I feel like right now, at least, definitively we can say if they pare things down, Dollars will make the cut, and that Dollars is the third down back if it's a passing situation. Should they? Do they need to? I don't know. I don't think so. I mean, as long as it's working and you look at what this team is doing, from a rushing standpoint, Dollars is averaging 7 yards carry, Irving 6.7, Cardwell 6.9, and then Whittington is at 3.9. I mean, if Whittington's numbers aren't great, but they're also not like, oh my gosh, he shouldn't be playing. He's not on par with these guys. I mean, he has a 20-yard run to his name, so it's out there.
Yeah,
and some of his, So I guess long story short, long-winded answer. I don't see them changing this philosophy until it's proven that it's hurting them and not helping them from a developmental standpoint. And people were wondering why Jordan James didn't get in against Eastern Washington. Conspiracy theory here. They are planning to redshirt him. And normally it would be, well, why wouldn't you do it against Eastern Washington? I think it's because they want to use Jordan James in maybe the 4 toughest games of the season.
I almost posted verbatim that on the message board yesterday, Matt. We all have the same tinfoil caps on here. I think they're saving those games because the 4-game rule makes it so you can be pretty strategic when you use them.
Yep.
They knew they didn't need them against Eastern Washington, and they knew they have 4 and now 5 guys because Kilo from Hilo played really well. Credit James Crepia from the Kilo from Hilo thing, which I think is also
it's his Twitter tag.
Okay, so
Twitter handle.
So credit
Kilo.
Credit Kilo Hana for Kilo from Hilo, but James is the one who told me that first. James refers to him exclusively as Kilo from Hilo.
As he should.
No, I feel similarly about that. I think you've got a rotation of 4 guys. You don't know if you need to play James in these games. Plus, everyone's healthy right now. Knock on all the wood. And if a player goes down and you want to maintain a 3 to 4 player rotation, James can now be available against Utah in November, against Washington, against Oregon State, against UCLA in October, whatever the games are you feel like you might need him. If you do need him, I think that makes some sense in terms of trying to retain his redshirt year. And then I had one thing on the Noah Whittington part, because statistically you would say he has been not as good as the other 3. It's a really small sample size, and a lot of there's also a thing called bad luck as a running back.
Yep.
And he has the most yards lost by a significant manner, 12. I don't think any of those are like his fault. That wasn't him missing a hole and just getting tackled. That is penetration by the opposing defense. Like if you go back and watch the Eastern Washington game, he lost 11 yards in that game. And I think 3 different plays got just absolutely blown up. And I don't think that was his fault. I think that was an offensive line missed an assignment, or a defensive player made a really good play and beat an offensive lineman and blew up a play in the backfield. I want to see him build more sample size before we just totally write him off, because I think there's become this inclination already of like, well, he's the not amongst us, but against those on the message board, because I spend some time reading. I'm curious to see what fans think about this running back rotation. I've spent a lot of time reading the thread. Whittington's kind of been written off. I get it from a statistical perspective. But again, we're talking 11 snaps or 11 rushes so far, 13 rushes for these guys. They're not all made even. And I think if you were to be objective and go and actually watch the plays, I think Whittington has had the worst luck in terms of facing fronts that have been in the backfield. And I think, frankly, Cardwell and Dollars and Irving have had pretty good luck with pretty favorable situations in terms of holes to run through. So that's just a little bit of me defending a guy who I said I think, because I had heard incredible things about Noah, and through 2 games, statistically at least, he's been the most underwhelming, although he did get the start last game, so clearly the staff likes him as well. So that's going to end our running back talk, but I think a lot there in terms of kind of our opinions on this running back situation going into a game where I expect the running backs play to be really integral to the final outcome here. Oregon has to run the ball against BYU successfully, and I frankly think they'll have a good chance to do that. All right, third one from @John Olvera. I loved the game Saturday. While I was glad to see the other quarterbacks get some real game reps, I don't understand the standing ovation Ty got. It's not like Bo didn't play a great game. I know we had a good lead, but I would have liked to have seen the playbook open for both quarterbacks. I think he's talking about Butterfield at the end. #Autzen Audibles. I actually just wanted to get your opinions because I wasn't at the game, and you kind of caught a little bit of Ty getting a pretty rousing reception. First off, just to both of you guys, because you guys were there, and I assume the press window was open.
Yep.
Was it Was it something of significance? Because this is not the first time I've seen somebody be like, "Hey, it was a lot." Was it a lot? Did it bother you guys at all? Is it a storyline we should be monitoring? Like, what do we think about that?
Well, in terms of a storyline we should be monitoring, probably not. Was it a really loud ovation for some reason that I also don't understand why Ty got? Yes. I thought it was probably one of the louder ovations of the night in terms of like, who was announced in the starting lineups are usually a good barometer of how many, what the popularity of that player is. When Ty was announced that he was taking the field, it was a pretty big ovation, and I don't get it. I'm like our good friend John Olvera who asked the question where, Bo was really good. He had 5 touchdown passes, almost over 280 yards. I didn't understand it at the time. I don't think it's a storyline to follow. I think it is very similar to last year, with just the Ty Thompson hype. And as soon as a quarterback performs poorly, even though Nix did not in this past game, he's just going to get the eventual ovation and calls from the audience to come onto the field.
I thought it was nothing, honestly. I think this is just the normal backup QB getting put into the game that's got a lot of excitement. I mean, I go back to when Kellen Clemens was the starting quarterback at Oregon and Dennis Dixon was the freshman, and blowout scenario comes in and Dixon comes in. There's just a lot of interest in seeing Ty Thompson play, and he got thrown out there, and fans have been clamoring for 2 years for the previous coaching staff to put the foot on the throat of their opponent and put yourself in a position where you can put your backups in the game, and it never really happened. And in the first game of Dan Lanning's career at Autzen Stadium, it happened, and backups went in, and I thought it was nothing. It was the normal cheer that I've been going to football games, Eric, you too, at Autzen for 30 years. And it's the normal cheer that you hear every single time there's a lot of interest in whoever the backup quarterback is and he gets in the game. That's plain and simple all it was in my eyes.
All right, to the second part, though, or the last part from John's question, would we have liked to see Jay be allowed to kind of maybe have like a real drive? Because Ty the playbook was open for Ty. I mean, you watched it. Yeah. Ty was allowed to throw the ball. They allowed a deep shot. Honestly, probably the ball that traveled the furthest for the entire game was the ball he threw down the sideline to Josh Delgado, where, he overthrew him. But I like the fact that they were letting the playbook kind of be open there, let Ty show off that arm. I know it wasn't accurate, but you could see that was like 45-plus yards in the air. Again, not on the money, but he can air it out a little bit. Ty had 2 good drives. He did throw for a touchdown. Both resulted in touchdowns, 5 for 7, I think 63 yards. All of that was great. Jay gets in with a lot of time left in the fourth quarter. I mean, plenty of time if you wanted to simulate a drive, and it was handoff, 1-yard pass attempt. I think he completed it to Kilo. What did we make of that? Would we have liked to see a little bit more Jay, or are we just kind of going, hey, at this point, clearly Bo's the number 1, Ty's the number 2. Jay's away from getting into a game that matters. Let's not be too worried about Jay not playing and getting much of an opportunity. Because I personally wouldn't have hated to at least see him have a series where it's like playbook's open, go for it. And maybe the playbook was more open and he also didn't execute it, and that was part of it. But would we have liked to see? Maybe the question is, would we have liked to see a little bit more from Jay in terms of moving the ball, whether it be playbook or also his own lack of production for whatever reason in that drive?
Sure. I don't know. Like, yeah, it would have been nice to see all 3 quarterbacks have an opportunity to make a drive. I think very clearly it's like you said, Eric. I think it's very clearly Bo, then Ty, then Jay. We were down on the field for most of Jay's drive, so we didn't really get to dissect it from our view up in the press box like we normally would. And yeah, it would have been nice to see Jay have a chance to go out there and show his stuff like Ty did for his 2 drives. I mean, clearly Ty had the open playbook and they called deep shots. They called probably plays that they had ran earlier in the game for Bo, and just to see what he could do. I don't think it would have hurt to have him go. I mean, the game's an absolute blowout. There's no no possible chance, no matter how poorly somebody messes up, that this game is in any contention. So yeah, it would have been nice, but I don't. It doesn't necessarily like matter to me whether or not he got his opportunities to go in. Like, yeah, it would have been nice, but he didn't, and I think that's kind of just the barometer where the quarterback competition is.
He got in with what, like 7 or 8 minutes to go in the fourth quarter,
I think it was more like 9, but yeah, we're splitting hairs. It wasn't a lot of time.
and it was like 70-14. As you guys said, it's clear Ty is the backup. I think Bo kind of let that out of the bag that it was him versus Ty during fall camp. When he spoke after the Auburn or the Georgia game. I just think this is third string quarterback. You're up 56 points. You don't want to, I mean, you've already kind of embarrassed Eastern Washington. You don't need to pour now salt on the open wound by throwing it around and airing it out with your third string quarterback. Had it been early fourth quarter, like the start of the fourth quarter, and Bo Nix didn't play at all in the second half, and Ty got all of the third quarter, yeah, give him a drive and to run the normal stuff and see what happens. But at that point in the game, all you're doing is just pissing off coaches and pissing off players and opening the door for a player to get upset on the other side and react and hurt somebody. And no one wants that. So I had no issue with it.
And Eastern Washington has a history of getting mad
Yes.
about things and hurting Oregon's quarterbacks. So I mean, I'm kind of tongue in cheek there because it's very different circumstances.
Yes.
By the way, this is just a small aside, Matt. Before we go to break,
yeah,
I can't imagine what it would be like in today's age where, or let's say Oregon had played Auburn in the opener and Oregon was beating Auburn at home, and then Auburn's player took out Bo Nix with a cheap shot. That would have been like it feels crazy that happened in a game at Oregon like 8 years ago. If that happened now, I think that would have been like and maybe it was then too, but like it feels like that's like a thing that you just don't see happen. And I guess the odds of playing against your opposing, your former school in week 1, it's just not very likely. But like it's kind of crazy that they took a massive cheap shot on Vernon Adams because he transferred schools and hurt him in the very first game of the season.
First game of the season, yes.
Just weird.
If social media was where it was at 7 years ago, it would be a much bigger thing. All right, let's take a quick break. When we come back, we'll wrap up these mailbag questions with a little bit of focus on BYU, who comes to town this weekend, ranked inside the top 15. All right, welcome back to the Autzen Audibles Podcast. 3 questions in the mailbag, 2 more to go. BYU-centric, it looks like.
Yeah, and the 4th one is from Ross Masolich. And by the way, Ross asked a question a couple weeks ago, and I asked him on the podcast to clarify his name. Ross, let me know how I did there. He sent me a direct message on Twitter, tried to clarify it. I think that right there was pretty good. Ross Masolich. If I'm wrong, let me know. Question from Ross. How comfortable do you feel with Oregon's defense against BYU, as they will present similar challenges Oregon faced in week 1? Mobile quarterback, screen game with explosive wide receivers, etc. .. Hashtag Autzen Audibles. For starters, their quarterback's a guy, man. I watched most of the fourth quarter and both overtimes in that game, and I came away pretty darn impressed with Jared Hall. Guy's really mobile, which could give Oregon problems. The drive at the end of the regulation, which resulted in a missed field goal, but looked like it was going to be the game-winning drive, was extended with his legs, with a couple of really nice runs where one was a scramble, one was, I think, a designed run. But regardless, he's going to be a problem. And he's not Stetson Bennett, but he's not 50 miles off like what you saw with Gunnar Talkington this last weekend. Like, and he's a very capable player who I think Jared Hall will play in the NFL at some level, whether it be practice squad, backup. I don't know if he's not think he's a starter, but he's got that side of athleticism at least. So to start with, I think Jared Hall's a guy, and I think that he's someone not to be taken lightly in this matchup. the explosive receivers part is interesting to me because we don't know if BYU's best two receivers are going to play in this game. You know, in this last game against Baylor, I thought it was really impressive that they were able to win that game without Puka Nacua and Gunnar Romney, who were the two top returning receivers from last year's season. Nacua has an ankle injury. Romney, undisclosed, whatever that means. So, and there's no clarity about, at least as of Monday morning when we're recording this, about either of them playing this week. I think that's pretty significant. It's also significant that Chase Roberts, a freshman receiver for BYU, had 8 catches for 122 yards and a touchdown. And a couple of those came in really big spots when I was watching. He sort of filled in there as their alpha guy, their go-to receiver, and had some pretty nice returns in that role. I'll be kind of curious to see if he can continue that against Oregon. Baylor has a great defense. It's one of the best defenses in the country, and he was winning one-on-one battles out there against them. That was the reason why I was pretty cautious about kind of expecting BYU to win that game, because you've got Hall, who I think is a good quarterback, going against a great defense without his top 2 receivers. That can be a challenge. Well, we'll now see what Oregon can do. And it's not like, by the way, BYU just lit up the scoreboard. They had 20 points in regulation. They ended up with 26 points to win. Is that going to be enough to beat Oregon? I'm not sure. I think it's going to be a challenge. But I do think, if we just get to the original question here about the defense against BYU's offense, this is not going to be easy. Hall will cause problems. Their run game, I mentioned earlier, why I kind of think we might see a little bit more Noah Sewell, a little bit more Justin Flo, maybe a little bit more Brandon Dorlus, some of those interior guys. BYU, even against a strong Baylor front that has one of the better nose tackles in Siaki Ika. I think I got that right. Pauly names, man. Former LSU guy transferred to Baylor. Huge body in the middle of their defense. Going to be an NFL player. They ran at that part of the field with, I won't say an incredible amount of success. Only had 85 yards rushing, but they tried to, and they ran it 33 times in the game. So I think they will be more assertive in terms of trying to establish the line of scrimmage and running the football against Oregon. And that's where we'll see a little bit, another opportunity really to see kind of how Oregon stacks up in the middle there. Because I do think BYU will not shy away from challenging there. And if Oregon can win those battles and force it to be Jaron Hall running around, making plays and trying to throw it to outside receivers who may or may not be his favorite guys, that's where Oregon might have an advantage. But I think it's pretty critical, the health of these 2 receivers for BYU, because Nacua is like a legit NFL guy. He started his career at Washington. At Washington, transferred back. And then Romney, I think, was Romney somewhere else too and transferred? Has he always been there? He might just be one of those guys who's on a mission. So
I think he's always been a BYU kid.
Yeah, I think he's been around for like 45 years because he's one of those BYU kids. But I also think, I might be wrong on this, I think he's Mitt Romney's like nephew or something. So
well, that's what I was going to look up too.
I think he is. I think there's some relation there. So regardless, I'll look that up in a second while you guys talk, and I'll confirm it later. But
thank you.
I think the health of those 2 will be potentially a pretty big deal.
I think, I agree with the health aspect of those 2 guys going out, because that significantly limits where BYU and their offense can go to. But I admittedly have not popped in any tape. I have not looked at BYU. I have not watched the Baylor highlights. I am interested. I've looked at the stats of the game and just the general overall numbers, but I'm not going to make some blanketing statements just because they ran for 85 yards. I do think that BYU is going to be a team, like Erik said, that are going to try and be physical with Oregon. That's just kind of their brand of football. I think Kalani Sitake, their head coach, I think he's a physical guy. If this were a Mario Cristobal game for Oregon, this would be just physical and physical. It'd be like 7-3 because they just be running it on every single down. But I think that's what's going to happen for the most part. And I think that's why you might see an uptick in production, like Erik mentioned, from Noah Sewell or Brandon Dorlus, Casey Rogers, somebody like that. But dealing with mobile quarterbacks, I don't know if I would say Stetson Bennett is a mobile quarterback. Can he move? Yes, he's no Tom Brady or anything like that. But I think BYU is going to have a mobile quarterback here. They're going to be somebody who actually can run their quarterback and move them outside the pocket, and if the pressure comes from the outside, they'll be able to move around and stuff like that. Like, I think Stetson Bennett was agile and able to move, but I think this is a different thing. And so to answer Ross's question of how comfortable do I feel, I'm going to have to put like an I don't know or an NA, because I need to watch more BYU. I need to put that in and really kind of dissect what they do as an offense. I feel better after Eastern Washington just because Oregon did do a better job along the perimeter and tackling with gang tackles, getting a lot of guys to the ball. But BYU is a different team. They're a much better team than Eastern Washington. They're going to be one of the better teams that Oregon is going to play for the rest of the season. They've earned that number 12 ranking. That win over Baylor was, at home. It's a great home field win. I think we'll talk about that later in the show as well. But I'm interested to see how Oregon performs against another really good team, because Georgia, obviously now ranked number 1, is considered the best team in the country. I think that they belong right there, and I think they'll stay there for the long run. But BYU is a much better competition level than Eastern Washington. So now Oregon gets in as a ranked team at number 25. We'll be able to see if this is a more comparable game, because I think there are very few teams in the country who are going to match up well with Georgia. But I think that Oregon has the chance to match up with BYU, but this will be the test, and Oregon gets the advantage of being home.
Oregon had just a sheer size advantage against Eastern Washington. That will not be the case against BYU. They are huge for a group of 5, air quotes, team. I mean, their offensive line is 6'8", 6'5", 6'5", 6'8", 6'6", and every single one of them is over 300 pounds. By the way, Kingsley Suamatia's return to Autzen Stadium, projected starting right tackle for the BYU Cougars. Their tight ends, Isaac Rex is 6'6", 250. Their receivers, the guys that they start, 6'2", 6'2", 6'4". Even their running backs are tall dudes. Chris Brooks and Katoa are both 6'1", and their third back is a 6'2" guy. And Brooks, who's their leading rusher and a senior, is 230 pounds. So
he played at Cal, by the way.
Yes. Oregon, this will be a physical game. And if you can't control the perimeter and you can't control the line of scrimmage, you will get beat, and it will be ugly. And is there concern for me? Yeah, I think there is, because I don't think Eastern Washington presented athletically, physically, and talent-wise a real strong challenge to this Oregon team. And the last time that we've seen a team that did, they got waxed. They got ran over, and they could not stop anybody. Will it be like that week 3 against BYU? No, I don't think so. But because I don't think BYU is as good as Georgia, not even close. But we don't still have an idea yet of how good or how bad this Oregon defense is until they play a team like BYU. So yeah, there's a high level concern here from me.
By the way, just coming back on that Gunnar Romney thing, distant relatives, according to a news report from 2020 from Baylor Romney, who is the younger brother of Gunnar Romney. He says distant relatives, but not a lot more information. So there you go.
It's a shame.
Final question from Rado. I didn't really give this a good enough read coming in, so I'm looking at this for the first time. Rado Brian. This guy's going to have to tell me how to say his name as well. I feel bad.
You think that's his name?
I think Brian is his name, probably. Maybe.
I would agree there.
Anyway, you're going to have to give me some insight how to pronounce this. But yeah, the question, yes, BYU beat Baylor, but it was at their place with a great crowd. How much do you think that helped them? And conversely, how much can Autzen hurt them? Of course, it helps playing at home. BYU does have a great home environment. And I think another thing to be aware of going into this game, BYU travels really well. Historically, BYU will have a lot of people in Eugene. I could see it being one of the more impressive visiting crowds from a non-conference perspective that we've seen at Autzen in a while. Just be prepared for that, especially those going to the game. There could be a lot of BYU people, in part because, sure, they travel, but there's also a large Mormon community throughout the West Coast and even in Oregon. And those people are, for the most part, BYU fans based upon the church, even if they didn't attend the school. So there will be some BYU folks here. Shoot, we had an intern a couple of years ago who is now down in Utah, Alec Aaron, who had ties to BYU. And he was, lived in Eugene. A lot of people who are from that, faith live in Eugene. So there could be a lot of BYU people. I'm just putting that out there. So how much can it hurt them? I think Oregon fans need to be showing up in droves. I know it was a little bit underwhelming from a home debut turnout for several reasons. Smoke, the fact that they got smoked the week previously by Georgia, and then the fact that it was an FCS program. But this is a game where I know students aren't back, which hurts, but I'd like to see, if you're an Oregon fan, this place just packed and have it be loud and have it be a problem, because this could also be a thing where it won't be like Justin Herbert at a home game at SoFi Stadium where the Raiders have as many fans. And it's like, that was wild, by the way, not to do just a brief tangent of it. Like they're driving to like ice the game, and the crowd is like just as like basically completely against them, like trying to get them to like jump off sides or to false start and things, because there's just a ton of Raider fans there. That won't be, I don't think that'll be the case. It won't be outnumbered by BYU fans, but I'd expect there to be 8,000 to 12,000, maybe more BYU fans at this game. I think it'll be a lot. So I think that part is big. And to the part of how much did it help them, of course, it helps to play at home, period.
Yeah.
Oregon was never going to beat Georgia, but if that game was played at Autzen, my expectation would be it would be at least a touchdown closer. Like Oregon probably would have scored a touchdown in that game, maybe. I mean, I don't know. Some of the execution probably would have been better, because it didn't help Oregon that they were playing that game in, again, not technically a road game, a neutral site game, but in the state of Georgia where it was 90% Georgia fans. So I think obviously college football home field, that's a big part. I think that's why Oregon's favored in this game. If this game was played in Provo, I'd be betting pretty good money this game would be favored towards BYU. So I think it's a big one for the home fan base.
Yep. To answer the first part of the question, how much did BYU's home field advantage help them and beat Baylor? I mean, none of those guys played on the field, obviously, but a home field advantage is clearly a massive thing for all football programs. You look at Texas and Alabama. That's the first true road game at a conference game for Alabama, and I think was like 10 years almost. That Texas crowd and the ability just to play in that heat and be used to it, that helped them tremendously. And you're going to want Oregon to have that same advantage. And, to talk about how much it'll hurt BYU on the road with Autzen Stadium, I'm not sure. I mean, Autzen is one of the best places to play in the country. It gets unbelievably loud. You have plenty of, it will try to hurt them. In the past, Oregon is very, very good at home, but BYU, like Erik said, they travel. This is a more experienced team. With teams like that, sometimes the road aspect doesn't necessarily affect them in other ways as it would with a younger team or a team that doesn't play in those types of environments often. But, I would expect that there to be a sellout crowd in Autzen come Saturday. I think this is one of the bigger home games of the year until we get later into the season in November. And now that BYU is coming off of a great win over Baylor, number 12 team in the country, that adds even more to it. So I think obviously Oregon's going to have an advantage. And like Erik mentioned, I think that's why they're favorited as well in this matchup, because they are playing at home and, because they had a really good week 1 home opener, a week 2 home opener, I guess. But we'll see eventually and how it transpires. But having Autzen at your back if you're the Oregon Ducks, that's certainly beneficial. Will it help them in terms of winning the game? Well, that'll be for on the field more than anything else.
Oregon's going to need a loud stadium. There will be a lot of BYU fans in attendance for this game. Oregon has played BYU in basketball multiple times in Eugene or in Portland, and there were a lot of BYU fans for those games. So I would anticipate Autzen, especially if there's a lot of tickets available, and especially if BYU winning last week at home against top 10 Baylor, there will be fans that will be wearing the blue and white in Autzen, and there will be a sea of it. It'll be a pretty big group. So if you're on the fence and you want to have an impact on this game, I would say, yeah, go to this game, because this, Oregon's going to need a large raucous crowd. We saw, I felt like we saw the crowd at Provo impact that game with the missed kicks by the kickers in that game. BYU also is coming in really confident in this one, as they should be. I mean, they beat Baylor, which is a top 10 team, a good program last couple of seasons under Dave Aranda. And then they don't look at the Pac-12 as a program or a conference that is superior to them, because go look at what they did last year. They beat Arizona, they beat Utah, they beat Arizona State, they beat Washington State, and they beat USC. They beat half the Pac-12 essentially last season. And they are not going to be scared of what they're going to face. And a lot of those guys on that team are back on this year's team. Oregon is going to need a good environment. They're going to need to play good. And they're going to need a crowd that's going to be engaged from the start to the end of this game to win. It's an all hands on deck type atmosphere for Oregon football week 3 against BYU, in my opinion.
I think we all agree. And we should note Oregon 3rd in the country with the longest home win streak at 20 games right now. So that's advantageous.
I wanted to bring that up, and I forgot to. Go back and look at the teams that they've played in that schedule of games. This BYU team might be the best team that Oregon has faced during that streak. And it might not even be close. I mean, I think the only one that would be in line to potentially be better than BYU was the 2018 Washington team, which came to town 7th in the country. And Oregon won that one by 3 points. And I think Washington maybe have ended up losing 3 or 4 games that season. I can't remember, but there are not a lot of heavy laden teams that came to Autzen during this streak. So this will be the toughest team Oregon's probably faced during that stretch. And I don't think it might not be close.
Yeah, I think that Washington team was a pretty decent team. I think they lost 2 games after that.
Yeah.
I think that, correct me if I'm wrong, I'm pretty sure they won the North Division that year as well. Yeah. But I'm with you. This is definitely one of the tougher teams. You're right. This is, I think, just the 3rd ranked team in that stretch. Washington, I think, was also ranked. Oh no, that game didn't get played. So never mind. It was there. That was in the canceled section of that because that was that weird deal where that got canceled. So never mind. They haven't played another. This is going to be just the 2nd ranked team Oregon has played during that span at home, as far as I can tell, scrolling through all these results. So big outcome, big tough game here against BYU. We'll have full coverage. We'll be at media all week and preparing for, again, what I think is going to be one heck of an environment and a great opportunity for an Oregon team that started by putting themselves really in a hole by dropping a terrible game to start this season. You win this game, you give yourself an opportunity to kind of move back to respectability nationally. If you go win in Pullman the following week, I think a lot is I think the perspective has changed quite a bit. Sure, there's going to be people who've been saying, wow, Oregon's a pretty good team, and the SEC must be awesome. Georgia's incredible. But I do think it'll give Oregon fans, Oregon fans and also the national perspective, a little bit of a boost, because if they start out 3-1 here, that's going to be pretty impressive to me.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. We'll have more coverage of this matchup and more on duckterritory.com throughout the week. Later tonight, Monday night, Dan Lanning will give his kind of review of Eastern Washington and then early thoughts ahead towards playing BYU. And so we'll have a ton of content that comes from that. We'll have more stuff later on this week previewing the game here on the podcast and as well on duckterritory.com. But until then, you've been listening to the Autzen Audibles Podcast.
Talk to you later, folks.
Peace.